All right, well, luckily no one really needed coffee before this, because this is probably one of the most exciting panels, I think. At least I think so this time. But I just wanted to kind of let everybody give a quick introduction, where they work and what they do and what they like to talk about. And start with Gilad.
Great. So I'm Gilad. I lead the data science team at BuzzFeed. We're about 20 people embedded across the company, working on a variety of problems. So some of us embedded in the newsroom, helping understand metrics, helping understand audiences, some embedded on the entertainment side, on video, and in the business side, touching all parts of the company.
And I'm Amanda Stent. I work in the CTO data science group at Bloomberg. My job at Bloomberg is to collaborate on our natural language processing efforts across the company.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard Bush. I'm president of a company called NYIAX. We're partnered with NASDAQ. We built, in partnership with NASDAQ, a forward future marketplace for media contracts, and we installed at the early stages of our work with NASDAQ on the blockchain, and that's my favorite topic as it's blockchain week.
My name is Steve Feiner. I'm a professor of computer science at Columbia. I'm especially interested in how people interact with computers and with other people through computers, with an emphasis on augmented reality, virtual reality, other kinds of wearable technologies.
And so I'll start the conversation off with Richard just around blockchain. You know, I know you. Thanks for taking time to come here after, even though it's blockchain week. But
My pleasure.
you know, one of the things we touched on earlier today was local news and how important local news is. And you know, as you know, Civil is using blockchain to kind of get their company up and running. What's your take on that? Is that something that's going to kind of span within the industry, or something that can kind of catch on?
Yeah, I think Civil's one of the companies which have brought forward this idea that you can start to encode the rules of how you interact with people inside an ecosystem. This is something that, if you look back to the kind of early days of the web, and you look to the companies like Napster and some of the challenges that those companies had, back then you couldn't really transfer anything of value in code rules without having a centralized party, right? And this is where Civil and companies like Civil are realizing that using blockchain, using distributed ledger technology and cryptography to really make sure that the actors inside an ecosystem are behaving in the right way, and removing nefarious actors from those ecosystems with the set of rules is really the core of what Civil's doing, and many others. And I think that's what's exciting. And most of the time, blockchain gets it gets put into a bucket of blockchain rather than the capabilities which are more important, because it's, after all, it's a technology, and it's still relatively early. And most people today still understand about blockchains because of cryptocurrencies, right? And that's the first thing that people know about or hear about in the news. And actually, the underlying technology is the interesting thing from our perspective, and I think for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just for instance, Bloomberg, we just switched to subscription for the website. So that's, as you can see, we're switching from an ad model to a subscription model. I mean, Gilad, do you think that's something that we'll see more across the industry?
Well, we don't have a subscription model, but we did integrate programmatic advertising actually fairly recently on BuzzFeed. Up until a few months ago, there were never any programmatic ads running on the site or apps. And I do think, I agree that the technology is very interesting, but it's this classic case of great, amazing technology searching for an application. So until it has the ability to deal with scale, for example, on the header bidding side, to take in sort of all these requests and answer them within microseconds. I mean, the technology cannot do that at this point. As long as it doesn't have scale in terms of implementation, so nodes everywhere, sort of other players participating, then it's not as useful. And I know part of the problem is the media companies have to buy in order for there to be scale. But it feels like the technology is super raw. So maybe in a few years, if we solve some of the core problems, that it may be a very lucrative way to engage in header bidding.
Okay, and then, just to jump more into the augmented reality, which we had a nice conversation last night about, Steve, how do you feel is that going to be a disruptive technology that's going to kind of get into the media space?
Yeah, so I think I, along with lots of other people, believe that AR is going to be a disruptive technology. The idea of being able to see information that is not currently perceptible in context of things that you can perceive, where that extra information is useful for whatever task you're performing, I think is a very powerful one. And right now we're in a situation in which slowly but surely we've gotten to the point at which a modern smartphone, which is really an incredibly powerful computer, in conjunction with the better and better sensors that are on it, can enable you to pull out the phone, look around, and actually see content that looks like it really is at a particular place in the environment. So right now that usually means downloading a specific app. Those apps are not particularly general purpose. They're often more entertaining than anything else. And there's still that notion of holding up the phone and looking around. So I think that when we're in a situation in which the display is something that looks a bit more like what I'm wearing right now, what at least one other panelist is wearing, and what some of the other ones who maybe are wearing contact lenses instead of glasses, as soon as those technologies are ones that look like, feel like, are comfortable like things like this, I think we're going to see an explosion in the way in which that notion of integrating virtual things with the real world occurs.
And that's going to really put a damper in walking down the streets in New York City, too. Or you run into people, they're texting. I can't imagine running into somebody looking around.
Okay. Well, that's a problem, basically. Clearly, if you're texting and you're staring at your phone, well, we've all seen all the YouTube videos of people walking into fountains and maybe even getting in worse situations. If I'm walking down the street and my user interface is making me look up over here and there and I bump into things, that's not good. And there will probably be lawsuits as well. So one needs user interfaces. That's part of what I'm interested in, is how do we make user interfaces that attend to the things that are happening around you and that don't essentially encourage you to do things that are dangerous to you or make you look foolish. So having content that doesn't disrupt what you're doing in a bad sense, I think is a good thing. If I'm walking down the street and I need instructions or directions, I don't want to be crossing the street and suddenly have a big, beautiful map pop up in front of me and keep me from seeing the cars that are coming along. So there are clearly situations which a system could be aware of, courtesy in part of sensors and communication with the rest of the world, in which you don't want to have content that's going to be dangerous or be confusing or make you look foolish when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody else.
Yeah. Man, do you think this is something that would help us, better understand complex data and to interact with it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we navigate in the world and we interact with artifacts, and if we can see and contextualize them in terms of what happened in the past and the number of items that have happened, if you're looking at a car crash, how many times has a car crashed on this intersection in the past year? Is there something here? If you're looking at a building, what are the companies in this building? What's the market value of this building? Depending on what you're interested in, that might be very useful for you. The job is to manage the information, of which there is a huge quantity, against what interests you and what you need to know right now.
And Gilad, last night we talked about, one of the issues around that was maybe scale. Could you maybe just elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think a few things. One, I'd say through the lens of BuzzFeed, a pretty sort of massively scaled cross-platform media company. It's hard for us to see these technologies as interesting if the general public doesn't really have access to it. And I'd say, like right now, you have to buy headsets that are fairly pricey in order to get some of these experiences. And I know there's a lot of work going into making some of this technology more accessible. But until that is a technology that that people are using, we don't see as much benefit. Obviously, experiment, but there's not going to be we're not going to be able to sort of engage with audiences in any meaningful way, wide audiences, until there's users there. There are users there. I'd say the other thing I keep thinking about is with augmented reality, and if I guess what is the pitch? Like, what is the incentive? Why should we expect people to use it? And I get it in the context of gaming. So Pokemon did amazingly well, was so engaging, all these people around the world using AR, finally. And it kind of showed us the promise for the first time, where anyone could just download an app and have this augmented experience.
That's actually how we got everybody here.
There's some Pokemons hiding
There
behind
is,
the room.
yeah.
And so I think the incentives, we have to examine the incentives, and while augmented reality and virtual reality, I think, could be really great storytelling experiences, we're already sort of struggling to get people's attention for long-form content. So what is the incentive? Why should they download this app? Why should they use this sort of mechanism to read news? And I'm not sure I'm seeing the incentive yet. And then the flip side, if we're at this place where this technology is everywhere, I don't know how many of you have seen Black Mirror, but I can't stop thinking about that one episode where they boards the bus wearing the headset, and there are ads everywhere, right? Everywhere you look, there's something embedded. And so what is this world, if we were to get to a place where there are incentives, people are using this technology, what is the world that it creates? And what are some of the unintended consequences?
Okay.
Yes,
So one
Stephen.
comment on that. So right now, if I go to Times Square, I'm surrounded with lots and lots of ads. And if I don't want to see them, I can block my eyes like this. I can look down, right? But if we're talking about a user interface, if you turn on your computer and there's lots and lots and lots of ads, you can use an ad blocker, okay? And you can prevent you from seeing the ads. On the other hand, of course, we know there are sites where if you use that ad blocker, they will detect that and they will make you turn it off or go away, right? So the nice thing about a virtual interface is that if you do not want to see those ads when you're on the bus, unless we're in some kind of a society, again, maybe courtesy of Black Mirror, in which you're forced to actually look at them, just turn them off, right? Or use something that keeps you from seeing them. Or use a service that curates them so that the ones that you see are ones that you really do want to see. So I think that's the nice thing about a virtual experience is that you have control over it that you might not have control over in terms of a real experience. I walk down the street, I'm going to see this building if I'm walking in front of it, unless I keep my eyes down at the ground and block them off.
Can I respond?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say yes. I think control is great and is a useful tool to think about privacy. So if the more control you have as a user, obviously the better experience it is for you. But then there's always a business incentive, right? So these you're not getting a service for free. So okay, so you may get some control and you'll get personalized advertising or block no ads. But there's some way in which the service will have to make money off of your experience.
Yes.
Whether it's tracking your location data, which happens now anyways in the background, and reselling that data so that other forms of advertising can reach you. Right? There's always something around the business incentive, unless it's some sort of subscription model.
Yep.
And even then, there's never sort of full control.
Okay, so I agree. I mean, you can have full control if I simply turn it off, right? And that's nice. I can turn off that stuff and not see it if I'm in a situation in which I want to do that, unless perhaps my subscription makes me swear that I will not turn it off. That's another issue, right? But the thing is that given that everything you've said is essentially a version of what it is that we do right now, the question is there a model in which companies can make money, do want to make money, in which people want to see that content that makes it more valuable than content that is not of an AR variety. And so my claim will be that there are many, many domains in which seeing this stuff that I can't see, I can't hear, I can't perceive right now in context of the physical things that I see is going to be advantageous. For example, maintenance and repair assistance, in which I'm looking at a piece of equipment, and instead of having to look at the manual over here and look back at the equipment and go back and forth between the two, I can look directly at the thing that I'm trying to fix, or directly at the thing I'm trying to actually operate, and not have to go and look at separate documentation. I think that's really important. being able to go and look at a building as I pass by it on the street. And as I look at it, I can see an apartment for rent, because let's say I'm looking for an apartment. And I can actually look up and I can see what floor it's on. I can then go, that looks interesting. I'd like to have an apartment up on the 20th floor over there. And then maybe be able to see momentarily the view that I would get from the apartment. And perhaps the view is kind of not a very good one. And I say, okay, don't have to worry about that one anymore. Being able to see that information in context, I think, is a very powerful concept. And for many, many different domains, ones in which I can't see that right now. Instead, I see completely dissociated something that I look at on my phone or look at on my desktop or look at on my tablet, which doesn't give me the power of seeing those things in the physical context in which they live.
And that would have been a big help for me with some of the Red Sox tickets that I bought last year, right behind the beam there.
Right.
That's
why they were so
from
cheap.
the seats.
Yeah, that side of the view. So just to jump into NLP, which I know Amanda's been waiting on, I always look at what's the dark side of NLP. I mean, is there kind of I guess a hyper-personalization that we kind of should be aware of? That
Sure. I do think it's fascinating that this conversation about AR went so rapidly to advertising, because to me, a lot of the media and journalism's challenges here are not so much about advertising, but about delivering relevant content at the right time, because now the newspaper has gone from something that you get and consume to something that follows you around in the world. Appropriate sourcing of evidence and information from people, contextualization, like being able to see when you need to start recording something and when you need to report something. So those are all other challenges and interesting ways to use AR beyond the advertising model issues. That said, Clay asked me a question about personalization. So how many of you in the last 6 months have gone anonymous when reading news online? Just pretended that you weren't logged into whatever you are. Okay, was it a really different experience? How many of you was it a really different experience? Okay, so you saw some stories that maybe you wouldn't have seen. How many of you clicked on them? Because I think that we like to think that people are interested in the facts, but many more people are just interested in what interests them. Like even if you were presented with all of the news, you would probably still choose to read the Red Sox story instead of the breaking news story about the earthquake in Tunisia or whatever is less interesting to you. So I think the challenge for media organizations is how to present people with enough information to bring us back into a common space, and giving people the information that they need to know right now, regardless of whether they've ever clicked on those kinds of stories. And a classic example is that something is happening in this city right now. You may never read news stories about this city, but you're here today. You need to know this thing because it's going to affect your ability to get home. It's going to affect your ability to go out tonight. So we should find ways to give you that information, regardless of whether it's something that you personally chose.
I mean, the thing that I've seen now with Facebook and all the social media is that it seems things are becoming so tailored towards you that it's almost, in a sense, turning into marketing. I mean, they're just pushing things that they want you to see as opposed to news at some point. I guess would be we'll go to Q&A. All right. Okay.
Hey there, my name's Chris. I'm a tech writer. And Amanda, I have a question for you. In a world where NLP is creating all this personalized content, what is the role of an editor, and how do you know what people need to know, and who decides?
First of all, NLP is the term that I would use is recommender systems. NLP provides features for the recommender systems, and the recommender systems recommend and personalize content to you. And I think the role of an editor is huge. If we think about a company like Bloomberg, we're interested in presenting the news that the market needs to know right now. And that's great because the market tells you, sort of gives you structure for presenting that news. But editors also need to think about the different perspectives to bring to a problem. So if we think about a journalist, an editorial in the New York Times yesterday where the journalist is trying to source as many quotes from women as men in his columns, being able to refer to a multiplicity of evidence to find the truth about something and communicate all the perspectives on that thing. Those are all really important things that NLP can bring a role to play because it can source quotes, and it can source sources, and it can source evidence and provide that information for editors to more broadly contextualize a story.
Anyone else? Oh, over here.
I'm Jennifer, a product manager at Dotdash. This question's for Amanda. You'd just spoken earlier about needing to move towards a common space in news. This actually dovetails pretty interesting with earlier conversations about decentralization and this trend towards everybody being able to share something in the news. So in your head, how do you sort of marry those two concepts? Does this mean we still need a centralized source for, good news, or can what you're talking about be achieved in a more decentralized system?
I'm tempted to say blockchain will solve all our problems.
I'll say
thumbs
later.
up in the front row. He'll say that. I think you can have a representation of a diversity of opinions while also reflecting what is factually true in a way that a majority of people will be able to converge on that factual truth. Now, maybe that's because I'm a computer scientist and I still think in ones and zeros and I believe that there is a truth. But I think that we can, as in our coverage of events, we can represent the range of voices around something while still communicating the raw facts of that thing in a way that hopefully is trustworthy and that people can agree on.
Actually, yeah, so it's a little bit outside of the context, but the way that we are using blockchain particularly is very much a centralized first approach, because we don't feel that the actors in the ecosystem are yet jointly incentivized to actually behave in a different way. So we're going to have to steward that through, right? So I do believe there's still a role, particularly in the exchange world, for the actual exchange and marketplace to be centralized, right? Because today, partly because of the technology, like you were saying earlier, is just not there yet. But what I think is most important is this idea that there's finally a transfer of value that can be exchanged under a set of rules, so that the actors can all behave in the correct way, right, or in a specific set of rules. So I think in that example you've just given, I think you can design a system like that, right? You're not just taking HTTP and all of the previous kind of internet protocols and try and create have a centralized trusted party. We've got the opportunity to actually design that from scratch now, and yeah, it's going to take 10, 20 years, right? It's not going to be quick, but I think it's exciting because we're at a point where we finally found a way for technology to play that role and enable the decentralized connectivity that the web promised 20 years ago now. So.
Can I just add to that question? As Amanda stated earlier, people aren't necessarily searching for facts, right? Readers want stories. And they're not fact-checking or presenting facts to readers won't necessarily make them change their mind. And one of the issues we've seen with online sort of misinformation is really an issue. It comes down to manipulation more than false information. There are cases of false information, and we are working, the platforms are working to take them down. But really with manipulation, it's much more nuanced. It's much more, it's sort of telling a version of the story that's not fake per se. The facts are still true. You're just leaving out an important part of the context and driving readers toward a certain narrative. So so how do you sort of combat that? I'm not sure we could do that just with algorithmic systems or just through the blockchain. And that's where really we like human curation and trust building with media entities is critical to building that bond with readers.
No, right there.
Yes, getting back, can you hear me? Good.
Yeah.
Getting back to the AI and VR area, state of the art. Mm-hmm. So I think I will say that, how do you feel about the fact that we're moving away, I should first say, moving away from kind of a linear analog world into a more 3D world, and how that affects how we construct the news? I think I'll also make an analogy to the art world, because VR and AR is really huge in the arts now. It's a real driver. It was an interesting thing that happened, I'll just say very briefly, at MoMA, a group called MoMAR used augmented reality to just change the Jackson Pollock Gallery into a totally new experience. But I mean, I think this idea of thinking differently or thinking digital is changing the way the news is being constructed. And do you see that at all? So the 3D world of news that is multidimensional.
So let's see. So a very, very complex question, and probably going to get a very complex answer. There is a lot of stuff happening in the world, right? And with AR, we have that ability to add virtual things to what it is that you see. Those virtual things can be things that you simply, as the creator of them, decide you want to put somewhere and then someone sees. As, for example, someone making an AR piece in a museum in which suddenly there's a painting on the wall that actually really isn't on the wall. Or there's a painting that is on the wall, and it's getting augmented in a way that maybe the artist didn't want, right? Maybe pointing out things that politically are interesting about the painting and maybe about the person who painted it. So, I mean, these are things that you could have done the old-fashioned way. I could walk into the museum with a guidebook that basically tells me things that maybe the artist didn't want me to know about that painting, and I'll sit there and I can look at it, right? But here's the guidebook, there's the painting. Being able to look directly at that painting and then see essentially those annotations on it can obviously be a more visceral and powerful experience. Now, one thing I think that AR can help with is that if I'm, for example, watching some news, seeing some news, or it's AR, VR, conventional media, and the news that I'm seeing says something like, well, Trump said today that, right? Now, I want to know, I think as a news consumer, did Trump really say that? And so is there some way that something could go out and query a whole bunch of sources and see, is there some agreement? You know, 90% of the sources say that he did, some say that he didn't. What do I think about those sources personally? Do I believe this one or that one? Something got said, it got said in context. You know, a person who says things usually says only one thing at a time in terms of the actual words. They said it at a particular time. Is there a way we're getting information from lots of different sources? I can see sort of a reconstructed timeline of the things that happened, and if someone says something, well, maybe the things they said before, which weren't reported in the particular story, put those things they said in context and make them mean something very different than if I heard it without the context. And so being able to see, hear, experience selectively both the things that the reporter, so to speak, human or otherwise, wanted me to experience, and then be able to go and grab some of that context that perhaps the reporter didn't want me to see, right? Didn't want me to hear. I think that perhaps can help in trying to put things in the context that perhaps got eliminated intentionally or accidentally by the thing or people who are doing the reporting. Okay, so you're saying that the digital things that we do change the way we think, change the way we respond to things. And I will claim that, you know, it's not just suddenly there's digital and everything else is the old-fashioned stuff, right? That all the while things have changed. When you had television, that changed. You know, a debate that you actually got to see what Nixon looked like in comparison with Kennedy. You know, maybe just the appearance of that kind of like, I mean, the guy just had more of a beard, right? And made him look in a way that perhaps people, you know, didn't like, right? Radio changes the way that we respond, right? So every, you know, not too many years, new technology comes along and makes things be different than it was before. So my personal feeling is that much though I have a lot of vested interest intellectually in AR and VR, I don't think, wow, it's so completely different any more than television was, radio was, FM versus AM was, being able to actually have a printing press rather than having scribes copy things. I mean, there's technology that's been happening over millennia, right? And it's just going to get better, and 20 years from now, we'll be talking about something whose name I'm not sure what it will be, that will be whatever the thing is that comes next.
Thanks, Stephen. Everybody want to give a round of applause for the panel?